I remember that morning like it was yesterday. The smell of turkey roasting in the oven, the sound of my daughter laughing in the kitchen, the warmth of what I thought was still my home. I'm 53 years old, and I've spent most of my life trying to be the kind of father who shows up, who provides, who keeps his mouth shut when things get uncomfortable. That morning, I thought I was still that man. My daughter Sarah had invited us over for Thanksgiving. Me and my wife Linda had been married for 28 years by then. We weren't perfect, who is? But we were solid, or at least I thought we were. Linda had been acting strange for weeks, distant. She'd spend hours on her phone, laughing at things I couldn't see. When I'd ask her what was funny, she'd just say, "Nothing, honey," and turn the screen away. I told myself not to read into it. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I wasn't paranoid. I was just slow to see what was happening right in front of me. My son-in-law, Marcus, had never really liked me. I know that now. Back then, I just thought he was the quiet type. He'd shake my hand, nod at family dinners, but his eyes never smiled. His smile was the kind that doesn't reach anywhere real inside you. Sarah was crazy about him, though. They'd been married for 6 years, had 2 kids, my grandkids, Emma and Tyler. I'd see those kids every other weekend when I could. I helped them move into their new house 3 years ago. I put in the drywall in their basement. I fixed their roof when a storm came through. I was the kind of grandfather who showed up. That's why the invitation to Thanksgiving felt normal. That's why I thought I was welcome. Linda and I arrived around 11 in the morning. The house smelled like a magazine ad. Everything perfect, everything in its place. Sarah hugged me at the door, but there was something off about it. Her hug lasted too long, like she was holding on to something she was afraid of losing. When I pulled back to look at her face, I saw worry lines around her eyes I'd never noticed before. "Dad," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something, but not right now. After dinner, okay?" My stomach dropped. I've learned in 53 years that when someone says, "We need to talk after dinner," nothing good ever follows. But I forced a smile and told her everything was fine, that we'd talk whenever she needed. I set down the wine I'd brought and the pie Linda had made, and I tried to ignore the feeling crawling up my spine. The kitchen was crowded. Sarah's mother-in-law, Carol, was there too. Marcus's mother. She's one of those women who smiles with her mouth but judges with her eyes. She took one look at the pie Linda brought and said, "Oh, how thoughtful. We actually already have 3 desserts, but I'm sure someone will eat it." The kind of comment that sounds nice if you're not paying attention, but cuts like glass if you are. I watched Linda's face tighten. She said nothing. She never did in situations like that. She'd just go quiet and small, the way she'd been doing more and more lately. The table was long and beautiful. Sarah had put effort into everything. Cloth napkins, real silverware, a centerpiece of autumn leaves and candles. The kind of table that makes you feel like family matters. Emma and Tyler came running in, shouting "Grandpa," and throwing their arms around my legs. That was real. That was the part that meant something. We sat down to eat. Marcus sat at one end of the table, his father on the other side. I was across from Linda with Sarah next to me. For the first few minutes, everything was normal. People passed dishes, complimented the food, made small talk. Sarah's father-in-law asked me about work. I told him about the construction job I'd been on, remodeling a downtown office building. He nodded like he cared, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere. Then Linda said something. It was nothing, really. She was talking about a new restaurant that had opened near our house, saying maybe we could go sometime, just casual conversation. But when she said it, she looked at me, and in that look, I saw everything I'd been too blind to see. She looked guilty. Marcus stopped eating. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly, deliberately, the way you do when you're trying to control yourself. Then he looked at his father. They exchanged a glance, the kind of glance that tells you 2 people have already had a conversation you weren't part of. "So," Marcus said, his voice smooth as oil. "I guess we should talk about the elephant in the room." Sarah grabbed my arm under the table. Her grip was so tight it hurt. "What elephant?" I asked, though I already knew. I could feel it in my bones. I could feel the axis of my life starting to shift. "Your wife," Marcus said, and now he was smiling, "has been very busy indeed." I looked at Linda. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her face had gone pale, and her hands were shaking. On the table I could see her fingers trembling as she tried to pick up her water glass. "Marcus," Sarah said, her voice sharp, "this is not the time." "When is the time, Sarah?" he interrupted. "When he finally figures it out on his own? Your mother's been seeing my father for 4 months. The room went silent. Not the kind of silence where no one's talking. The kind of silence where the world has stopped spinning and everyone's holding their breath. I looked at Carol. She was staring at her plate, her lips pressed into a thin line. I looked at Marcus's father, and I saw it then. The guilt in his expression, the way he couldn't quite look at me. I looked at my daughter, and I saw tears streaming down her face, and then I looked at Linda. "Is it true?" I asked her. She still wouldn't look at me. She just nodded, so small I almost missed it. I felt something crack inside my chest, not break, crack, like a wall that had held up the whole structure of my life had developed a fracture you could see light through. I couldn't breathe right, I couldn't think right. Everything I'd built, everything I'd worked for, the person I'd tried so hard to be, it all seemed to be falling apart in real time, right there at that beautiful table with the cloth napkins and the candles. "How long?" My voice sounded strange, like it was coming from someone else. 4 months, Linda whispered. I did the math in my head. 4 months meant it started in August. August. I remembered August. I remembered Linda telling me she was taking a pottery class on Tuesday nights. I remembered her coming home late, her hair different, her makeup fresh like she'd just reapplied it. I remembered asking her about it once, and she'd laughed and said I was being silly, that she was just learning to make bowls. She wasn't learning to make bowls. "And you knew about this?" I asked Sarah, my voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, I just found out last week. I wanted to tell you, but—" "You should have told me," I said. "You should have told me immediately." "Why?" Marcus's voice cut through the conversation like a knife. "So you could what? Play the victim, pretend you didn't see this coming?" I looked at him then, really looked at him. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that your wife has been lonely for years," he said, standing up now, his voice getting louder. "I'm talking about the fact that you've been so focused on being the perfect father to Sarah that you forgot you had a wife. I'm talking about the fact that my father saw something in Linda that you clearly couldn't be bothered to see." The words hit me like physical blows. Not because they were true, though maybe some of them were, but because he was saying them, because he was enjoying saying them, because this man I'd helped, this man whose house I'd fixed and whose kids I'd loved, was standing there in his perfectly decorated dining room, using my failures like weapons. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "I'm leaving," I said. "Good," Marcus said. "Actually, that's something we need to discuss. Linda and your wife are going to be spending a lot more time together now, given the circumstances. We think it would be better if you found somewhere else to stay for a while. We don't need the drama here. We've got kids." The way he said it, "We don't need the drama," like I was the problem, like I was the one who destroyed something, like my pain was an inconvenience to him. "You want me to leave?" I asked, still not quite believing what I was hearing. "We want you out of the house," he said. "Today. You can come get your things next week when everyone's calmer." I looked at Linda. She was still staring at her plate, tears rolling silently down her face. "And you?" I asked her. "Is that what you want too?" She didn't answer. That was answer enough. Sarah was crying now, real tears, the kind that come from somewhere deep. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was going to—" "It's okay, honey," I said, and I meant it. It wasn't her fault. None of this was her fault. But it was happening. It was really happening. I walked to the front door. I could hear Linda call my name once, softly, but I didn't turn around. What was there to say? I'd spent 28 years building a life with someone, and in 4 months, it had all fallen apart. I'd spent 5 years helping my son-in-law build his house, and he'd just thrown me out of it like I was garbage he'd stepped on. I got in my car. I sat in the driveway for a long time, my hands on the steering wheel, wondering where I was supposed to go. I had a daughter who loved me but couldn't help me. I had a wife who'd betrayed me. I had a son-in-law who'd humiliated me in front of my family, and I had nowhere to sleep that night. I drove around for hours. I stopped at a gas station and bought a coffee I didn't want. I drove past the neighborhood where I'd lived with Linda for the last 15 years, past the house we'd paid off 3 years ago, past the life I thought was mine. And as the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, I realized I had nowhere to go. My brother lived 2 hours away, but I couldn't face telling him what had happened. Not yet. Not while it was still so raw, so fresh, so humiliating. My best friend had moved to Arizona 5 years ago. I didn't have a lot of people I could call at 6 in the evening and say, "Hey, can I stay at your place? My wife's having an affair with my son-in-law's father." So I drove back to Sarah's house. I parked on the street away from the driveway, and I got out. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. I could see shadows moving inside, people cleaning up from dinner, going about their lives like mine hadn't just exploded. There was a porch at the back of the house, one I'd built myself 3 years ago. The wood was good, solid. I'd made sure of that. There was a bench there too, where Sarah used to sit with Emma when she was learning to walk. I sat down on that bench, in the dark, and I pulled my jacket around me. It was November, it was cold. The forecast said it might snow. I sat there for a long time, not thinking about anything, just existing in the space between what my life had been and whatever it was about to become. My phone buzzed a few times. Messages from Linda, from Sarah, from people I didn't want to hear from. I turned it off. Around midnight, I lay down on the bench. It wasn't long enough to stretch out fully, so I curled up on my side, using my jacket as best I could as a blanket. The cold seeped into my bones. My back hurt. My heart hurt worse. I spent the night on that porch, watching the stars move across the sky, wondering how I'd gotten here, wondering what I'd done wrong, wondering if this was what rock bottom felt like, or if there was somewhere lower still to fall. Dawn came slowly. The sky turned from black to deep blue to gray, and I watched it happen without sleeping. My body was stiff, my joints aching from the cold and the hard bench. My breath came out in small clouds in the freezing air. I didn't move. I wasn't ready to move. Moving meant acknowledging that this was real, that I wasn't going to wake up and find out this was a nightmare. Around 6 in the morning, I heard a car in the driveway. A truck, actually, the kind with Morrison's hardware supply written on the side. I recognized it. Old Tom Morrison, who runs the supply store down on 5th Street. He's been in business for 30 years, the kind of guy who shows up early to everything. He was probably just making a delivery to Marcus's house, probably didn't even know what had happened yesterday. I stayed still on the bench, hoping he wouldn't see me. I didn't want to have to explain. I didn't want to see pity in anyone's eyes. But Tom was thorough. After he rang the doorbell and left the package by the front door, he walked around the side of the house to check if anyone needed anything else. That's the kind of guy he is. When he saw me curled up on the bench, he stopped dead. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Tom's a big man, thick chest, weathered face, the kind of hands that have worked for 60 years. He was wearing a brown jacket and work boots. His expression went from confusion to concern in about 2 seconds. "Jesus, Frank," he said, and he said my name like he was praying. "What are you doing out here?" I sat up slowly. My back screamed in protest. "Just needed some air," I said, which was possibly the worst lie I've ever told. Tom looked at me for a long moment. He looked at my clothes, wrinkled and dirty from sleeping on a bench. He looked at my face, which I'm sure was a mess, unshaven, red-eyed, pale. He looked at the porch I'd built, at the house I'd helped construct, and something in his expression shifted to understanding. "Come on," he said, walking toward me. "Let's get you inside where it's warm." "No," I said quickly. "I can't. I'm not welcome inside right now." Tom nodded slowly, like he understood more than I was saying. Maybe he did. Small towns have a way of knowing things, of spreading information like water finding cracks. Or maybe he just looked at me and saw a man who'd lost everything. "Okay," he said, "but you're not staying out here. Come on, my truck's warm. We'll get some coffee in you." I wanted to refuse. Pride is a funny thing. Even when your life is falling apart, you want to maintain some dignity. But I was freezing, and I was hungry, and I was so tired that I could barely think straight. So I followed Tom to his truck. The cab smelled like coffee and diesel fuel, and the particular scent of someone who works outside. Tom turned on the engine and cranked the heat. He pulled a thermos from under the seat and poured me a cup of coffee. It was strong and hot, and it was the best thing I'd tasted in hours. "You want to tell me what happened?" Tom asked, not looking at me, just looking out through the windshield at the quiet street. I told him. I don't know why. I guess because he didn't ask with pity, and he didn't ask with judgment. He just asked like he wanted to know. So I told him about Linda and the affair, about Marcus throwing me out, about sleeping on a porch in November. It all came out in a rush, like once I started, I couldn't stop. Tom listened. He drank his own coffee and listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "That's rough," he finally said. "That's about as rough as it gets." "Yeah," I said. "It is." "You got anywhere to go?" he asked. "Not really. My brother's 2 hours away, but I'm not ready to ask for help yet." Tom nodded like he understood that too. "My cousin owns a motel about 20 minutes from here," he said. "Not fancy, but it's clean. I could call him, get you a rate, first week on me." I wanted to refuse. I wanted to tell him I didn't need charity, that I could figure this out myself. But the truth was, I couldn't. And standing on pride when you're literally homeless is just a way to make things worse. "Okay," I said, "yeah, thank you, that would help." Tom made a call right there in the truck, talked to his cousin, made arrangements. Told him I was a good guy going through something rough, that I'd pay him back as soon as I could. Within 15 minutes it was arranged. I had a place to stay, but before Tom drove me to the motel, he had one more thing to do. He drove back to the post office. "I need to get the mail," he said. "I deliver packages. Sometimes I pick up the outgoing mail too. Come on inside." I followed him into the small post office. Margaret Washington works there. She's been working there for 20 years, knows everyone in town. When she saw me, her face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, concern, and then something like anger, like she'd heard what happened, and she was furious on my behalf. "Frank," she said, coming around the counter. "Oh, honey, come here." She hugged me. I'm not a man who cries easily, but standing there in that post office with Margaret Washington's arms around me, I felt something break inside my chest. Not the crack from yesterday, a full break. All the things I'd been holding in, all the shock and the hurt and the shame, they all came pouring out at once. Margaret let me stand there and fall apart for a few minutes. Then she wiped my face with her hand and said, "Let me get you something." She went to the back and came back with a cup of water and a small package. A padded envelope, actually, the kind you use to send important documents. "This came in this morning," she said, handing it to me. It's addressed to you, but it came here at the post office instead of to your house. I was going to hold it until you came by to pick it up, but, well, here you are." I looked at the envelope. My name was written on it, in careful handwriting. The return address was just a number and a street, no name. I didn't recognize it. "You should open that," Margaret said, and there was something in her voice. Something that made me feel like she knew something I didn't. "Not here," I said. "I'll open it later." "No," Margaret said firmly. "Open it now. Trust me." So I did. Right there in the post office, with Tom watching and Margaret watching, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Several pages, actually. And behind it, documents. Official-looking documents, deed documents. I started reading the letter. It was from someone named David Chen, and he was writing to tell me that my mother had made a decision. My mother, who'd passed away 3 months ago. My mother had left me her house. The letter was from David Chen, an attorney, and his words felt like they were reaching across time itself to grab me. I read them once, then twice, then a third time, because my brain wasn't processing what my eyes were seeing. "Dear Mr. Morrison," it began, "I am writing to inform you of the final wishes of your mother, Eleanor Margaret Morrison, who passed away on August 15th of this year. It is with great pleasure that I contact you to inform you of an inheritance that will change your life. August 15th, 3 months ago, 2 days before Linda told me she was starting her pottery class. I kept reading. My mother had owned property, a lot of property actually. The house she'd lived in her whole life, a 4-bedroom Victorian on Maple Street that I'd grown up in, was paid off completely. But there was more. There was a commercial building downtown. There was a second property, a small cottage by the lake. And there were investments, stocks, bonds, real estate holdings that had been carefully accumulated over 53 years of work and saving. The total value was approximately $2.3 million. My mother had been a librarian. She'd worked at the county library for 40 years, raising me alone after my father left when I was 5. I'd never thought of her as wealthy. She'd always lived simply, drove the same car for 15 years, wore the same coat every winter. But she'd been careful. She'd been smart. She'd put away money every single month, reinvested her returns, bought property when prices were low. She'd built something, and she'd left it all to me. "Your mother made this will 15 years ago," the letter continued, "and updated it 5 years ago to include the additional properties and investment accounts. She was very clear about her wishes. All assets are to go directly to you, with no conditions attached. She wanted you to have security, Frank. She wanted you to know that no matter what happened in your life, you would always have somewhere to land." I stood there in the post office, the letter shaking in my hands, and I felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Not in the way it had yesterday, not breaking apart, but settling into a new configuration, a new reality. Tom put his hand on my shoulder. "Good news?" he asked carefully. "My mother," I said slowly, "left me her house, and some other things." "How much?" Tom asked, not in a greedy way, just in the practical way of someone trying to understand the scope of things. "A lot," I said, "more than I ever knew she had." Margaret was crying, actual tears streaming down her face. "That's wonderful, Frank," she said. "Your mother was such a good woman. She always said you deserved the best." I looked at the documents in my hands. The deed to the Victorian house on Maple Street, the deed to the commercial building, the investment statements showing accounts with 6-figure balances. It was all real. It was all mine. And it had been waiting for me this whole time, like my mother had somehow known I was going to need it. Tom drove me to the motel. The place was exactly what I expected. Small, clean, nothing fancy, but it was warm and it had a bed. Tom checked me in, talked to his cousin, made sure everything was set up, Before he left, he put his hand on my shoulder again. "You're going to be okay," he said. "I don't know how, but you are." After he left, I sat on the bed in that motel room and I read the letter again and again. I called the attorney, David Chen, and we talked for 2 hours. He explained everything to me: the properties, the investments, the accounts. He told me my mother had been meticulous about managing her finances. She'd written detailed notes about every investment, every purchase. She'd wanted me to understand not just what she was leaving me, but how she'd built it. "Your mother spoke about you often," David told me on the phone. "She was very proud of you. She wanted you to have opportunities. She said that the world would try to take things from me, and she wanted to make sure I always had somewhere safe to land." Safe to land. That phrase kept echoing in my head. That night I didn't sleep much, but it wasn't because of the cold or the hard bed. It was because my mind was racing. I had options now, real options. I could hire a lawyer to handle the divorce properly. I could make sure Linda didn't take advantage of me in the settlement. I could build a new life, something better than what I'd had before. But I also knew something else. I knew that money wasn't going to fix the hurt. Money wasn't going to make it hurt less that my wife of 28 years had betrayed me. Money wasn't going to make it hurt less that my son-in-law had humiliated me in front of my family. Money wasn't going to bring back the time I'd spent trying to be good enough, trying to be the right kind of man, only to have it all thrown in my face. What money could do was give me power. And power, I realized, was something I'd been missing this whole time. The next morning I got up early. I called a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but David Marcus, who was known in our town for being ruthless in divorce cases. When I told him what I needed, he listened carefully. "This is going to be expensive," he warned me. "Money's not an issue," I said, and I meant it. "Then let's make sure your wife doesn't get a dime more than she's legally entitled to," he said. Over the next week, everything moved fast. I filed for divorce. I contacted a real estate agent about the house Linda and I had bought together, the one Marcus had told me to leave. That house had a mortgage on it, but it was in both our names. My lawyer made sure to protect my interests. I met with the investment manager my mother had used for 15 years, a woman named Patricia who knew every detail of my mother's portfolio. "Your mother was very wise," Patricia told me during our first meeting. "She wanted to ensure that her assets would provide for you not just now, but for the rest of your life. She set up several accounts specifically designed for long-term growth. With proper management, you'll never have to work again if you don't want to. Never have to work again." The phrase felt strange. I'd worked since I was 16 years old. I didn't know who I was without work, but there was something else my mother had left me, something the will mentioned specifically. A handwritten letter, sealed separately to be given to me in person by the attorney. David Chen sent it to me in the mail. I opened it alone in my motel room, sitting on the bed with the door locked. The letter was in my mother's handwriting, shaky but legible. She'd written it about a month before she died, when she knew her time was getting short. Cancer, the doctors had said. She'd fought it quietly, without telling me how serious it was. She'd spent her final months putting her affairs in order, making sure everything was prepared. "My dearest Frank," the letter began, "by the time you read this, I will be gone. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what to write to you, what words would be important. But I think the most important thing I can tell you is this. You are worthy of good things, not because of what you do, not because of how hard you work or how much you sacrifice, but simply because you exist. I've watched you your whole life try to earn your place in the world. I've watched you work hard at jobs that didn't appreciate you. I've watched you give your heart to people who didn't deserve it. And I've watched you blame yourself when those people failed you. I want you to know that it's not your fault. When someone chooses to betray you, that's about them, not about you. When someone chooses to hurt you, that says nothing about your worth. You are a good man, Frank. You are kind and strong and true. And you deserve to be with people who see that, who value that, who would never dream of throwing it away. I'm leaving you money, not because I think money will fix what's broken in your life. Money can't do that. But I'm leaving it to you because I want you to have choices. I want you to be able to walk away from situations that don't serve you. I want you to be able to say no. I want you to be able to build a life on your own terms, not on the terms that other people set for you. Live well, my son, live boldly, and please, please forgive yourself for being human. I read that letter 5 times that day. I read it sitting on the motel bed. I read it sitting in my car. I read it at David Chen's office while I was reviewing the final documents. Each time I read it, it landed differently, like my mother was speaking to me across the space between life and death. By the end of the first week, things were in motion. My lawyer had served Linda with divorce papers. The house was listed for sale. I'd made an appointment to see the Victorian house on Maple Street, the one I'd grown up in, the one that was now mine. I drove there on a Saturday morning. It was November, and the trees were almost bare, their branches reaching up toward a grey sky. The house looked exactly like I remembered it. White painted wood, green shutters, a wraparound porch. My mother had maintained it carefully. The garden out front was neat, the paint was fresh, the windows were clean. I had a key. The lawyer had sent it to me. I stood on the porch, not the porch where I'd slept 3 days ago, but the porch of my childhood, and I put the key in the lock. It turned smoothly. Inside, the house smelled like my mother, like lavender and old books and the particular scent of a home that's been loved and cared for. Nothing had changed. Her furniture was still there, her pictures on the walls, her books on the shelves. It was like stepping into a time capsule, into a version of the world where my mother was still alive and everything was still whole. I walked through the rooms slowly. I touched the walls. I sat in her reading chair. I opened her kitchen cabinets and found her favorite tea still there, unopened. In her bedroom, I found a photograph on her nightstand. It was me, from when I was about 6 years old, standing in front of this house, smiling at the camera with a gap-toothed grin. I sat on her bed and I cried. Not the kind of crying I'd done in the post office, desperate and broken. This was different. This was grieving for my mother, for the time I hadn't spent with her when I could have, for all the conversations we hadn't had. But it was also gratitude. It was love. That night I slept in my mother's house for the first time since she died. I slept in my childhood bedroom, in the bed I'd slept in when I was young and everything seemed possible. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, I slept through the whole night without waking up in pain. The next 3 months were about rebuilding, not repairing, rebuilding, because the life I'd had before wasn't worth saving. It had been built on a foundation of people who didn't value me, circumstances I couldn't control, and a kind of resigned acceptance that this was just what life was supposed to look like. The divorce was finalized in February. Linda got the equity in the house we'd shared, about $80,000 after the sale. She got some of our joint savings. She got the car we'd bought together. It was all fair, all legal. My lawyer made sure of it, but what she didn't get was anything beyond what the law required her to get. I didn't give her anything extra. I didn't let her off easy. I know that sounds cold, maybe it is. But I learned something through this whole process. Sometimes being kind means being clear about what you will and won't accept. Sometimes compassion means boundaries. Marcus and his father had no idea what was coming. They'd thrown me out thinking I had nothing, that I was broken, that I'd just disappear quietly and they could all move on with their lives. They didn't know about my mother's will. They didn't know that the man they'd humiliated was about to buy the building they ran their business out of. Yes, I did that. I found out that Marcus's father, Robert, ran a commercial real estate business out of a building downtown, a building he rented. A building that, as it turned out, belonged to a trust that was being dissolved, and the property was going for sale. My lawyer contacted the selling agent. We made an offer. We won the bid. I became Robert's landlord. When he found out, when he got the letter from the new management company informing him of the change in ownership, I heard he went pale. I heard he called his lawyer. I heard he tried to find a loophole, some way to break his lease. There wasn't one. His rent went up at the next renewal. Not illegally, just to market rate. The kind of increase that's legal and reasonable and completely devastating to someone who wasn't prepared for it. He had to move his business. It cost him thousands of dollars. It cost him clients, it cost him. I didn't do this out of spite, exactly. I did it out of clarity. I did it because I finally understood that the world doesn't reward people who are passive. It rewards people who act. It rewards people who know their own worth and protect it. But that wasn't the real turning point. The real turning point came when Sarah came to see me. It was a Sunday in March, about 4 months after Thanksgiving. I was working in the garden at my mother's house, clearing out the winter debris, planting new flowers for spring. I'd been spending a lot of time there, learning the rhythms of the house, discovering all the little things my mother had loved. I'd found her journal in the attic. She'd been writing in it for 30 years, documenting her life, her thoughts, her dreams for me. When Sarah pulled into the driveway, I didn't recognize the car at first. Then I saw her get out, and she looked so small, so worn, like she'd aged years in those 4 months. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly, walking toward me. I stood up slowly. I was covered in dirt. My hands were muddy. My back was aching from bending. I looked at my daughter and I felt 1,000 things at once. Love, anger, disappointment, forgiveness. They all tangled together in my chest. "Hello, Sarah," I said. She started crying immediately. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry for everything. For not telling you, for letting him throw you out, for not standing up to him. I'm sorry for all of it." I set down my shovel. "Come here," I said, and I held my daughter while she sobbed. We sat on the porch, not my mother's porch this time, but a new bench I'd built there. And Sarah told me everything. She told me that she'd been trapped, that Marcus had become increasingly controlling, increasingly cruel, that finding out about Linda and Robert had been like seeing the mask slip on someone she thought she knew, that the last few months had been about trying to figure out how to leave him without destroying her life. "But I found out about the house," she said, "about what Grandma left you, and I realized that you weren't destroyed. You were going to be okay, and I thought, if Dad can get through this, so can I." I looked at my daughter. "Are you leaving him?" "I already did," she said. "I moved out last month. I took Emma and Tyler to Mom's house. To our old house. We're staying there while we figure things out. I'm looking for lawyers, trying to figure out custody arrangements. It's messy and it's scary, but I'm doing it." "I'm proud of you," I said, and I meant it with everything in me. "I want to know you," Sarah continued. "I want my kids to know their grandfather, not the version of you that Marcus created, the tired, worn-down version, the real you. I want to rebuild our relationship." We spent that afternoon together. We walked through my mother's house. I showed her the photograph on my mother's nightstand, the one of me as a kid. I showed her my mother's journals. I told her stories about her grandmother, stories I'd been saving up in my head all these years. And Sarah told me about Emma and Tyler, about their school, about their dreams. Tyler wanted to be an engineer. Emma wanted to be an artist. "They both still asked about me sometimes," Sarah said. "They wondered where Grandpa had gone." "You can see them whenever you want now," Sarah said. "I'd like that," I told her. Over the spring and summer, I rebuilt my relationship with my daughter and my grandchildren. I taught Tyler about building, about how to measure and cut and put things together properly. I helped Emma set up an art studio in one of the spare rooms at my mother's house, where she could paint and draw whenever she wanted. I also made a decision about my future. I'd been offered my job back. My boss had heard through the grapevine what had happened, and he wanted to make things right. He offered me a management position, more money, better benefits. I turned him down. Instead, I started my own business. A small construction company, just me and a few guys I trusted. We did careful, quality work, renovations, restorations, the kind of projects that took time and skill. We weren't trying to maximize profits. We were trying to create something beautiful, something that would last. By the end of the summer, I'd done something else. I'd reached out to Tom Morrison and bought into his supply business. He was getting older, thinking about retiring, and he needed someone he could trust to take over. We became partners. It felt right to invest in someone who'd shown me kindness when I had nothing. But the thing that changed me most profoundly was something quieter, something more internal. It was the realization that my mother had been right. I was worthy. Not because of what I'd accomplished, not because of how much I'd sacrificed, but simply because I existed, and that worth couldn't be taken from me by betrayal or humiliation or failure. By the time autumn came around again, a full year after Thanksgiving, I was standing in a different place, literally and figuratively. I was standing in my own home, the Victorian house that had been in my family for 3 generations. I was standing with my daughter and my grandchildren, who were spending the weekend with me. We were planning to make pie together, all 4 of us, for a dinner I was hosting. I was no longer the man who'd slept on a porch. I was no longer the man who'd accepted less than he deserved. I was no longer the man who'd defined himself by what other people thought of him. I was the man my mother had always known I was, and that was enough. On that autumn evening, as Emma and Tyler laughed in the kitchen while Sarah helped them with the pie crust, I thought about that letter the mailman had brought me. Margaret had been right. It had been my turning point. Not because of the money, though the money had mattered. It had been my turning point because it had reminded me that I was loved, that I was valued, that someone had believed in me enough to spend her whole life building something to help me land safely when I fell. My mother had given me more than property and investments. She'd given me permission to believe in myself. She'd given me the knowledge that I was worth saving. And in the end, that was what had changed everything. The porch where I'd slept that cold November night was still there. Sometimes when I drove by my daughter's house, I'd see it and remember what I'd felt lying there in the dark. The despair, the fear, the sense that my life was over. But I didn't feel that way anymore. I felt awake. I felt alive. I felt like the future was something I could build rather than something that was happening to me. And every time I saw that porch, I didn't feel pain. I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the breaking, because it had forced me to rebuild. Gratitude for the darkness, because it had made me appreciate the light. Gratitude for the mailman who delivered the letter. For Margaret, who'd encouraged me to open it. For Tom, who'd shown me kindness. For my mother, who'd loved me enough to reach across death itself and catch me when I fell. Life, I learned, doesn't always give you second chances. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you get them anyway. And when you do, you have to be brave enough to use them.